Hello, everyone. This is Debra, and this is Human Potential at Work. And today is GAD. We are filming this today for Global Accessibility Awareness Day, and I'm really honored to have my guest today. Her name is Betsy Beaumon, and she is the CEO of Benetech. And if you aren't familiar with Benetech, you're going to be so impressed. They're doing such amazing work. And so, Betsy, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, and happy GAD.
Yes, I love GAD. I think it's such a good idea that Joe Devon came up with, and I, we've all gotten behind it. And I think Dennis was involved in the efforts too. So it's really good to celebrate where we've come, and certainly we have a lot to do, but it's very exciting. And I love the work that Benetech does because it is similar to some of the stuff we are doing in a much smaller way. But let me tell you a little bit about Betsy, and then I'm going to ask her to tell us a little bit about herself as well. But she served in an executive leadership for both for-profits and nonprofit technology organizations. She was the president of Benetech before she became the CEO, and she's helped drive the development and growth of all Benetech initiatives, including inclusive education, poverty alleviation, and human rights. I love their website. You definitely got to check out their website at www.benetech.org. Right?
Yes.
Org, thank you. She's a social entrepreneur and an engineer. I love women engineers. And she co-founded 2 software companies, including the first web-based information referral service for human services. She defined the concept of born accessible, a vision where all digital content is made accessible to everyone when it's created. Yay. Betsy's developed products across the software, semiconductor, and informational sectors. She previously held senior positions with BEA Systems, TradeBeam, Social Online Service, and Cisco Systems. And she holds a degree in electrical engineering from Northwest University. Once again, love celebrating women in STEM, women in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So thank you, Betsy, for that leadership. So let me turn it over to you. So I did this bio, but tell us a little bit more about who Betsy is.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. And I think, as that bio shows, I'm somebody that decided to go into tech, but maybe a little different than some. I decided to go into tech because I always thought it should make the world a better place. Even from a very young age, when I first heard the term engineer, I actually thought maybe they drove trains, and then realized what different engineers did and thought that sounded really cool. And I loved math and science, so that just seemed like a great path. But I also started to think about just ways that technology can improve lives. And I meandered across, as you've described, multiple parts of the tech field, but always kind of came back to what could make the world better. And when I'd also wanted to be an entrepreneur my whole life. My father was a small business entrepreneur, and I used to see his first dollar bill framed in his business, and that just always stuck with me. So when I had the chance to move to Silicon Valley and said, I'm going to do a startup at some point, I was looking at a bunch of ideas, and this was as the internet was really just becoming the internet we know today. And really the one that stuck out and the one that I decided to pursue was around social services. So I think, that kind of gives you a hint as to my leanings, when I sort of feel like I get to choose what's important, I went that way, and went back and forth, went to another venture funded startup. But when my company BEA got sold to Oracle, I decided, when am I going to do this? Like, when am I going to really dedicate myself to doing good in the world every day? So that's when I went looking around. I did some volunteer work in East Africa, and really was interested in social entrepreneurship, because as an entrepreneur and somebody who'd been running businesses, as well as somebody who thought that tech should do good in the world, I thought, how can I combine these two things? And then I met Jim Fruchterman, the founder of Benetech, and the timing seemed to work out well, that he happened to have a general manager role open running Bookshare, which is still today our largest initiative. And the rest is history. I've been at Benetech a little over 11 years.
And I love Jim. I love Jim. I actually interviewed Jim on Access Chat, and I just love he's such a visionary. He's really an amazing man and accomplished so much. And I love your story because women have not been encouraged, still are not really being encouraged like we want them to move into technology. It's happening, and girls that code, and we're doing things, but I think as society, we need to do a lot more of them because women add great values to these technology conversations. And women, according to research and studies, women are very collaborative and often do want to say, well, because I was a programmer for 6 years.
All right.
Yeah, and I got good at it, but I've said this on air before, I hated it because you make one little tiny mistake and boy, everybody does it. So, and I make tiny and big mistakes constantly, all the time. So I wanted to be in a different part of the technology field instead of programming, but I learned so much from doing that. And so I love the story of your life because it's very powerful. And I, like you, really believe that technology is a powerful equalizer, especially if we can make sure it's accessible for everybody. And so I just think it's really important. So tell us a little bit more about Benetech. I mean, you mentioned one of your programs and what you're known for, but y'all do so much more. I love the work that you do. There's so many good things.
Thank you. Really everything we do boils down to three areas: inclusion, equity, and justice. So all the stuff that Benetech is working on do focus on one or more of those areas. And more specifically, we're doing work in education. So Bookshare is probably the best known example of that, which is, for those who don't know, it's the largest library of accessible resources in the world. We now have somewhere around 700,000 users in over 80 countries. And we have well over 700,000 books. And we've really moved along from just offering, individual books to individual users as well. We're still doing that. We're serving students in the US, but we're also actually providing the platform now for libraries around the world. So other libraries for people with print disabilities like RNIB in the UK all runs on the Bookshare platform. And, that kind of gets to that whole ethos of we're tech people, right? We put a lot of effort and focus on having a super scalable platform. And that means, also the collaborative part you mentioned. I always say we play well with others. We were partnering with groups like RNIB and others in the DAISY Consortium for many years. And I was starting to have conversations some years back with them saying, you're all now kind of going more to ebooks, which is what Bookshare produces and makes accessible. Maybe you ought to look at our platform because, we don't have a lot of money in this field. Why should we reinvent the wheel? So how can we help you to help more of your members? But Bookshare is just one of the things we do in education. We also have something called the Diagram Center, which is an R&D center all about that whole STEM thing you mentioned, right? It's images, graphics, math, chemistry. We've even done a little bit around coding, like how do you help make it more accessible for somebody to be a programmer? And we can talk about that a little more because that's had its challenges over the years as a field. So the Diagram Center is doing lots of cool standards and things that are really, looking ahead. But we're doing a lot of things in math and images as well. So we have a newish tool called MathShare that came out of the Diagram Center that really started with how can we make math more inclusive? How can you show your work in algebra, which my algebra teacher, who was the one that told us all we could be engineers, boys and girls alike. I think about him always saying, show your work and having to go through all the steps. How do you do that if you're blind? Frankly, how do you do that online at all? So that's what MathShare is really there to help with for people with a whole range of disabilities and or just math learning needs. So that's an example in education. You mentioned our human rights work. So we've been working in the human rights field really almost as long as we've been doing Bookshare. And I will say there's multiple big anniversaries this year. We know we have the ADA 30th. This year is Benetech's 20th anniversary. So
congratulations.
thank you. So we're
Wow.
going to be celebrating that more. People will hear about that more a little bit later in the year. But so Bookshare is almost 20 years old, and so is our human rights program. Almost. It's about 17, 18 years old. We have been providing tech to human rights defenders. So our team has spent years making sure that people could document human rights abuses safely and securely. So, that you're not in a very dangerous place writing down all the names and addresses and inputs of people who are vulnerable and making them more vulnerable.
Right.
Today, we're using artificial intelligence to work on Syrian justice. So there's a justice mechanism for the Syrian conflict, and we are actually doing work to help go through the 5 million plus videos that are out there among a whole cohort of groups. So that's some example in the human rights space, but one of the important ones for this topic that we're doing in human rights is we're doing disability rights work at this point. Some years back, I said, well, wait a minute, we're doing all this work in the disability field, doing a lot of work in the human rights field. How about we put those two things together and start really helping people with disabilities have a voice all around the world? Whether it's for the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, for local laws, think about voting rights. That's a huge topic right now. How can we help make sure that disability organizations and the actual people that they're serving, people with disabilities, actually can get that out there, whether it's, statistical data or just the stories of, great, there's this law that's supposed to protect me. Is my life better? Am I really getting that? So to me, that's a really important area in the human rights space. And one of our newest areas is in poverty alleviation. And that one, data about services. How does a family know what services are available for their child if they don't have a doctorate in the social safety net navigation?
Right.
And I think the COVID crisis is giving us a big view into how problematic that social safety net is today. I think it's showing a lot of the cracks that were already there. But now, so many more people need food, so many more people need services. And there are, pop-up services like pop-up food banks. The current information structure just isn't structured to handle that. So that's something that Benetech is working on right now, beginning in the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area around us. But again, this is something that's a global need. And I think, the last thing I'll mention and then shut up is that you and this podcast and on work that I know you for is around employment. So, we see such a connection between education and employment, and certainly Bookshare again is a great example where we have groups not only using Bookshare to make sure that everyone has access to vocational materials, but also I'd say our work in India is a really great example of partnering with a group called Enable India that's all about job skills training, some of which are soft skills, right? How do you have a good interview if you're not used to being out conversing? And that's something that they're training, people from small villages in India to do. And, these are people with disabilities who may have had even less exposure to other parts of the world, to other people. Bookshare can help bring that exposure. If you've read books, like even if you haven't been able to travel to San Francisco, you can read about it. And, there's a lot of just amazing folks on our team in India, as well as Enable India, that are doing wonderful work in that.
Yeah, it's impressive. It's impressive to see all the different work that you're doing. And I know, as you mentioned, we're in the middle of the COVID-19. I don't know if we're in the middle, the end. Anyway, we are experiencing the COVID-19 crisis during this interview. And I heard a statistic that 40% of children are, as we send everybody home to stay safe, shelter in place, 40% of children don't have access to, online education. So they're not able to keep up with their peers. And you mentioned the food, I mean, and the lack of information, and the information is, even the information we get, it's, you don't know if it's accurate, and it's, there's information overload and fake news, and it's very confusing to get through it all and to try to figure out, what do I need to do to protect myself and my family, my loved ones. So I'm really glad to hear that Benetech is stepping into these really big, important conversations, because so many people are at risk, and it's you're right, we're seeing the cracks. We knew there were problems.
Yeah.
We for years have been talking about accessibility, how important it is, and you noted I'm a big proponent of employing diverse populations, because this is good for everyone, not to mention the innovation and the creativeness that it brings to the table. Don't Everybody should be exactly the same, everybody shouldn't think exactly the same, because there's value in the diversity and all the intersectionalities of diversity as well. But I know that y'all also talk about tech for good, which I believe in. Tech for good, tech for all, digital inclusion. If we don't have those things, we can't truly include people with disabilities and other disenfranchised groups. You'd mentioned Syria and the refugee crisis that we have all over the world. But Benetech does tech for good, but how are you working with corporations to make your amazing work, even more powerful on the world, helping more people?
Yeah, I think that gets back to what I mentioned. I mean, one, as you mentioned in the introduction, we are a .org, we're a nonprofit. Some people hear Benetech and think we're, a for-profit tech company. We are not. We are a nonprofit who, does software for social good. And that's a benefit, because that means we can really focus where either the market fails or doesn't go, right? Corporation, they have many stakeholders, but they do need to make money. We need to break even. And that means we can serve populations as, more recognized now, say people with disabilities in the tech sector, which is fabulous. But, when we were doing Bookshare early on, I literally had people in the global development sector, at nonprofits in the global development sector, say, we'll worry about them later, unquote,
Yes. Yes.
and then you have to quote the statistics and say, so you really think you're serving the people, the poorest of the poor and the people around the world in poverty? So, but I think the corporate sector, number one, hats off to many of the tech companies who really have, over the last decade, really woken up, really gotten on the ball, and that's great. So what that means, and Benetech, because most of us come from the corporate sector at some point, we sort of know what makes them tick. We can be a good partner, whether that is saying, hey, can we use this technology for good purpose, not to compete with you? That literally, some of the beginnings of Benetech go back to a bargain like that. We also just find ways to say, what are you good at? What are we good at? How can we help advise? So we act as I know you do, as an advisor, but also just as a partner. And we've actually, everything from having Google Summer of Code engineers. We've done lots of work with volunteers in our own services, but also as a tech company, so to speak, right? We've also helped make sure that tech volunteers are well suited in other organizations, because nonprofits aren't always quite as tech savvy about, how do I, if a Google or Microsoft or Apple engineer walks in your door, they don't just instantly, become effective. There's a whole infrastructure you need around them. So I think there are many ways that Benetech sees ourselves as really a bridge between Silicon Valley and the social sector. Often, we're often the ones that somebody will call, and we'll go in and have a conversation, even if it's not going to have anything to do with our products. We are not tech consultants. Don't want to get the wrong idea out there, but at the same time, we are, in the sense that we are tech people. I have a really talented team. So people will ask questions, people in the social sector who, may not be able to afford a chief technology officer or somebody who's, a high-end engineer. We have a team of those people. So I think, there are a lot of ways that we work with both the corporate sector and the social sector and really bridge the two.
Yeah, and you were talking about technology. Technology, as we both agree, once again, great equalizer, but at the same time, sometimes it can hinder things. So, how do you think technology helps, and yet at the same time, it can hinder us and our progress? And I also want to say, just before you begin this, that the reality is that if we have all this amazing technology, but we can't get into the hands of the people that need it, it's going to create problems, which we're seeing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I think, again, the COVID-19 pandemic is a good example of many of these things. I think on the helpful side, and it's so great to frame it this way. I find that many of the talks I give, like, I'm always the glass half full and half empty person, it feels like, because I'm saying, here's what's amazing, and then here's what to watch out for, right? Because again, as a techie, our organization actually produces software. So, we have a pretty good idea where some of the pitfalls are as well. So, I think on the helpful side, it's just massive, right? You could take anything from, a lot of people don't think of a wheelchair as technology, or glasses that you and I are both wearing. These are technologies, right? They're ones that have been around a while, but these are technologies that, make millions and millions, tens of millions of lives better, if not hundreds of millions of lives better, every day, right? So this is something that is not as obvious. Well, then you think about assistive technology more in the information side. As our society becomes more information driven, it's one of the reasons that with Bookshare and the Diagram Center and some of the other work we do, we focus a lot on how do you make information accessible, because information is a huge currency in our society, whether you are getting a job or whether you are participating as a citizen, or if you just want to have fun. Like, if information technology is not accessible, there are issues. So I think, they're great examples. I would say, we're on Zoom right now. One of the reasons Benetech uses Zoom is because we have found it to be one of the most accessible platforms for video conferencing, for web conferencing. And that's important because we have multiple employees who require it to be accessible. And so, that's a big deal. So I think there are great examples where, we can bring in somebody who may, have a severe disability in a rural area, but who I could actually be on a Zoom call with. That is an example of a ton of technologies coming together, from the basic, internet infrastructure to the application itself, to the platform it's on, right? And this is where you have to say that, those people making operating systems, that has to be accessible. So I think the fact that all of that stuff is there, the fact that we have, I don't know, I can't even count 50 different ways that somebody can read a Bookshare book. That's amazing. And that's how it should be, by the way. But that's a big sign of where it can help. So we see kids every day that, because of technology, graduate from high school, go on to the college or career of their choice, because technology enabled that. Without it, it's not that. There are examples of people that, have been successful before that, but not in as big a numbers, and it's harder. You shouldn't have to be an unbridled genius, right, to get through your math class. Can technology help, the rest of us actually become engineers, right? So that's the, the helpful side for sure. I just, again, we do tech for good. If I didn't believe in that, I wouldn't be able to go to work every day. There is the downside, right? So when is it a problem? Well, it's a problem when the whole world is information technology based and something isn't accessible.
Right.
So that means that, it's a problem if there are stairs and no ramps to get into a building. It's also a problem if there are no digital ramps to get into an application. If a website that you have to use to vote or pay a bill or whatever is inaccessible. That's just game over right there for a whole large number of people. And it's not fair. It is not equitable. So I think there's a lot there. The other big piece that I focus a lot on is the data. So the data side that I mentioned with our data for inclusion work, one of the issues is that the data by and about people with disabilities are severely lacking globally. In the global sector, one of the big pushes under the UN CRPD is even just how do you disaggregate people with disabilities so that you don't act as though someone who has trouble walking is exactly the same as somebody who has trouble hearing. These different accommodation needs, different requirements, so to just say people with disabilities X, like that's just not good enough. And that's the best case today for most of the data out there. So yeah, there have been great pushes around how to disaggregate the data, things like our data for inclusion and other projects out there. How do we just have more of it? And having more of it, that gets into AI. So one of my, again, areas where we're using AI to great effect in our work in Syria. We're also actually doing a lot of AI work behind the scenes on math in Bookshare so that we can make sure that as books come in, we can better identify math equations, which often come in as pictures still, even in ebooks, they come in as image, not as 10 equations that you have to solve. How do we recognize the difference between an image that's a bunch of math equations versus a picture of Debra? AI can really do a lot there. And so, I think there's some great AI stuff, but the potential and the actual fact today of bias is huge, and bias against all vulnerable population. And there are issues with bias against women in data, and definitely people with disabilities. And that shows up in screening candidates for jobs. It shows up all over. So, one of my firm beliefs is that we need to look very hard at the data sets that are training the machines when you do machine learning. And if you don't have enough and a variety, an appropriate variety of data, again, by and about people with disabilities, that's a problem.
I agree. I know that I spoke at the ILO event in Geneva, and we talked about the concerns that a lot of us have about these unconscious bias. And, let's just say it, the biases that, some of it's unconscious, some of it's flat out bias.
Yep.
And the data is biased. And some of the data, it's not even all about, as you know, the biased data. It's just lack of data about people with disabilities and other different groups. And I've heard it said a couple of times, and I totally disagree with it, that society disables people. People aren't disabled unless society is disabling us and not allowing us to use the technology, or not allowing us to go into the built barriers. And now, the big concerns we were talking about before we all started talking appropriately about COVID-19 was the concerns about artificial intelligence, continuing accidentally to leave out millions and millions of people. And a lot of people still don't identify as being part of the disability community. And I think you brought up a good point. When you're talking about people with disabilities, we lump in somebody that's deaf with somebody that uses a wheelchair, with somebody that's blind, with somebody that has invisible disabilities like, bipolar or ADHD or others. And so I try really hard to break down some of the barriers we're having about deciding that people are broken when they have disabilities. Like I've heard doctors say about my daughter with Down syndrome. And I disagree that my daughter is broken. I think my daughter was made, and I know people think, oh, you're just being optimistic. But my daughter is not broken. She has taught me a lot about technology. She's taught me so many great things, and as I've been blessed to be her mother. But my mom had borderline personality disorder, which is a tough mental health illness. And I learned a lot between both my mom and my daughter. So we can learn a lot from society,
Absolutely.
but from people with disabilities, because, they're people, they're humans. So
Yeah, and
I don't know if you wanted to comment on that, or yeah, go ahead.
yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree. And it goes back to diversity that you mentioned earlier, right? I mean, diversity matters and it makes a difference. And it makes, certainly from a tech standpoint, it makes better products.
Right, right.
There are tech companies who are kind of getting the memo about that and purposely hiring neurodiverse teams so that you do get different perspectives because I mean, I've seen it working on tech teams forever that you don't all have the same ideas and you can approach a problem completely differently, and that's a strength when you're trying to be innovative.
Mhm.
That's a it's not a weakness, it is a strength. So yeah, I am with
And
you.
your customers are diverse. Your customers are diverse. Why don't you, just a thought, why don't you design for your customers so they can use your products? I sometimes use the example, my mom has passed over, but my mom had really bad diabetes at the end, brittle diabetes. And my mom struggled with technology. My dad, like your dad, my dad was a technologist and also an entrepreneur. And but my mom never got into technology, and I would say it was a simple thing, which caused a lot of frustration between me and my mom, but just pressing her finger on the glass to open up her iPhone, she could not do it because she just didn't
uh,
have the sensitivity in her fingers. And I was like, well, just press hard. And I would get so frustrated, and she would get more frustrated with me. But things like that you don't even, if you haven't had those experiences yourself or seen it, you don't even consider, problems like that. And that's just one little problem, but it was very frustrating for her. And she felt it was a little bit of a conspiracy, that she wasn't going to be included in technology because she was too old and she didn't understand the world. And it actually, I talked about this on a show yesterday, it actually affected her self-esteem. And
yeah.
we see that happening with adults like me that are getting older and aging into disabilities. According to AARP, 46% of us will have disabilities by the time we're 65. Not meant as a threat. It's just we're humans, and we're fragile, and we learn so much walking with disabilities. We learn so much. They can become great strengths to us. And so it's not a negative, it's just part of being alive, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly. I often tell people, I can't fly
hmm,
without assistance, but that doesn't mean that, I don't have a lot to offer the world, right? It just, there
yeah,
are very,
let's tap
very,
into what you're good at. Just
yes,
a thought,
yeah,
because we all bring different things to the table. And I hear these horror stories of, artificial intelligence being designed, and it's just being designed by a small team of white guys. And by the way, there's so much value. I'm married to a Caucasian man and my son is white, but it's not even that, but we bring differences to the table. We are brought up differently, we bring different ideas, and there's real value in innovation, especially technological innovations, to bring that to the table. So it's interesting as I watch something came up on the internet the other day, in that there was a panel that was going to be all males, and they immediately got attacked. And the group is actually, they try to be very diverse in their panels. And they said, well, we actually did reach out to multiple women and they weren't available at the time. Nobody cared. I don't care. Reach out to more women. Don't have a panel of all men. Don't have a panel of all women. I mean, you can, but there's really strength in bringing the allies into the conversation.
I
And
agree.
so I want to hear what men have to say. They're a very, very important part of our population. But I think all of these things that are happening just continues to show why the work you are doing at Benetech is so important, and why corporations need to be supporting you during these times. These are a time of crisis, and a lot of nonprofits and social entrepreneurs and enterprises, we're at risk. We're at risk just like everybody else. But how do you make the world a better place? I suggest that we work with people that are that's what they do, is they work to make tech for good, tech for all. So, are you seeing any of those things happening? Um, I know I am seeing it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel for everyone, right? I mean,
Yeah,
this pandemic is affecting many, many people, but I am extremely worried about the nonprofit sector.
I
I
am
think,
too.
um, hey, there are lots of tech venture funded startups going out of business at this
Mhm.
moment as well. So I mean, it's hitting a lot of folks. And I should have said earlier, as a nonprofit, I mean, one of the ways we work with the corporate sector is we are funded, by various companies as well as philanthropy. And we do have fee for service. Like we have a lot of different ways that we stay afloat. But it's really critical, and I'm quite worried. I'm worried about the longer term.
Mhm.
For us right now, we have multiple longer term sources of funding, but you know that that doesn't go on forever. And I think, knowing, my plea to corporations would be not just for us, but yeah, think about who's out there doing that work on the front lines that needs support. How can we all, and I include myself in this personally, go over and above to really support, whether it's a small business, a nonprofit, groups that are right out there that are suffering, and I think unfortunately are going to suffer as these recessionary kind of scenarios that we see playing out. I mean, it's not just this week, right? It's going to
Right,
be
right.
a long term. I think we
Yeah,
need to think
it's going
about
to be a
this
long term.
bit of a
And people
marathon.
just don't know, right? People don't know what to expect. I heard, I'm trying not to watch a lot of news because it just frightens me. uh, but I heard that there are some estimates that 50% of small business in the United States will fail in the next 6 months. Hopefully that's absolutely wrong, but the reality is we're in for a long ride. And what I don't want to see the corporations do, and I know that there are a lot of people in society, is to say, oh, I'm just going to tighten my belt and I'm not going to worry about anybody else. I'm just going to, sort of like the toilet paper scenario. I'm just going to grab all the toilet paper and I don't care if you don't get it. You should have been faster. So I think that this COVID-19 crisis is a good time to take a look at what are you contributing to the world? What do you wish the world looked like? How do and really join these very important in tech for good, tech for all conversations, and support organizations like Benetech that are proving. I mean, I've always loved your name, Benetech. I just think beneficial technology, of course, so, you know, how big is Benetech? How many team members do y'all have? I just, in my mind, I think of you as a big organization, but I'm not really sure. Do you
Yeah, so
mind
so we have
exploring the?
about 85 people, which is some contract staff. We are, and already were actually before the pandemic, fairly virtual and distributed. But yeah, I think, we're big-ish for a nonprofit and quite small if you compare us to a for-profit tech organization.
Right.
But, a lot of those folks are, these are people answering Bookshare customer support calls. These are, I mean, literally, we have a person who has a scanner and a book chopper in her apartment right now, chopping and scanning books for students so that they can learn at home. And I think, to your point about support and all the work going on, I think we're all in this together. And that
Yes.
is, for me, that's just how I look at it. And so whether it's financial support for a nonprofit, or it's us, making sure that we're supporting every last student with a disability. And I'll tell you, the demand is huge. My team is working flat out on trying to make sure that kids with disabilities that are now trying to learn at home can do that. Now, the good news is Bookshare is by nature virtual. So, we have ways that really all of our tools are distance kind of tools. But I'll tell you, we had our biggest single month ever in Bookshare signups in March, and then it got bigger in April.
Wow. Wow.
So,
So
so
that's exciting, just
it,
that even more people know about what you're doing because it's such important work. And society expects corporations to be good. And a lot of people in society, especially the younger people, it's not the younger people anymore, everybody, they're sort of suspicious of, large corporations. And I am all for capitalism, but not capitalism that doesn't make sure that society benefits as well. So I personally predict that what's going to happen with this crisis after we go out of it, a lot more people are going to be paying attention to what can we do better. I think a lot of us have been caught in I have to do this and I have to do this, and it just a wheel. And now we have the opportunity to say, well, what could I do and how could I contribute? And we do expect corporations to be giving back and joining and partnering and collaborating, and then telling your stories, because you might be doing these great things, but if we don't know about them, then that's a problem. So we will perceive what you're doing unless you tell us what you're doing, which I wrote about in my book, Inclusion Branding. You've got to tell us what you're doing, and you've got to let us tell your stories, because what you would say, Betsy, about a corporation and what I would say as a market influencer sometimes can be heard better than what you're saying about yourself. So I think there's that opportunity as well. And we need to, we need to make the world work for everybody. And I know some people are like, yeah, but we do if we want to progress as human beings. So I really, really appreciate the time today, Betsy. And will you tell the audience how they can, learn more about Benetech? I know you're all over social media. And I was on your website this morning. I was just looking around again, and I saw there was a tab that asked if you wanted to be a partner, or you want to donate, or support, or there's a lot of different ways. And once again, an amazing website. Applause to your website.
Yay to my team.
Really good information. Yeah, and very accessible, so you all can have access to it. But tell us more about how to find out about you, and also let me give you the last words. And what do you wish the world looked like as we come out of this COVID-19 crisis and we learn from this?
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So accessing Benetech. So benetech.org is our website, and that's Benetech. So like good technology, Benetech. There is no other N in there. Some people want to confuse us with Genentech, but Benetech. Benetech.org. And from there, you can get to all of our different programs. You can sign up to partner with us, to volunteer, to give. Really, we like to, as I said, really participate fully with individuals, with corporations, with philanthropy, with government. I think everybody has its part to play, and we're one of those parts. And we've talked a lot about Bookshare, and you can get there from the Benetech site, but that is bookshare.org. And that's where anybody with a qualifying print disability, which is defined there, can sign up and get access to lots and lots of books. And a quick shout out to the corporate sector on that side. We have over 850 publishers who give us their books every day. Same day they go to Amazon and other ebook outlets. So, big cheers to that part of the corporate sector as well. Yeah, great job. How do I want to see us come out of the COVID-19 pandemic? I think as a whole society, I want maximum health and minimum loss. But I think when I look ahead, I say, how can we now look at those things that we knew were problems already, and can we fix some of them as we come out of this? I know it's a lot, right? There's a lot of pressure in all sides that we talked about, but I really want to say, how can we make learning more inclusive? How can we actually think about who has been more clearly left out as we've been trying to do this remotely, and let's figure out how to be more inclusive there. Let's look at the social safety net that, again, like we knew had lots of issues, and now it's just way more obvious. How can we fix some of those so that we're stronger coming out of this? I mean, I'm always looking for how can we be stronger? How can we be a more resilient society? And how can we all remember what it's like to say we're all in this together?
Yeah, well said. Well said, Betsy. Well, thank you so much, you and your team, for everything you're doing. I had the pleasure to sit on a panel with one of your leaders when I was in San Francisco when we were still, out and about.
Yes, when we
And
went
I
places.
was, yeah, I just have been always impressed with what you are doing. So thank you so much for your time today and your leadership. I'm love seeing strong, smart women technologists. So it's a real honor to interview you today, Betsy. So you stay safe and happy GAD Day and happy
Yeah,
8830 and happy 20 years to Benetech. That is very exciting milestone.
thank
So
you. And thank you for this opportunity and for all the work that you're doing. And as I said, I've been very impressed, but I'm happy to join the group of people that you've been interviewing on this podcast. So thank you so much.
yeah. Yeah, it was a delight to get you. So thank you, Betsy. And thanks to the audience. Everybody stay safe. And we got this. We got this. So talk to everybody next time. Bye bye.